Howdy! I'm going to be installing a preformed splice case today. I'll be installing it in the underground. As you can see, I've already set up everything. And I've also taken the time to open up the splice case so we can show all the components. The first items you'll pull out of the box will be the application procedures. Next will be the end plate kit. For the end plate kit, we have two-section end plates packaged. We have an emery cloth for scuffing the cable sheath. We have lock tape sealant in strip form for application on the end plate halves. We have lock tape in roll form for application on the cable sheath. Also, we packaged the cable measure tape around the roll. We have a PLP cue card included in the kit. Then also a package of UV protection sealant. Well, the next boxes you'll pull out of the closure will be 2 torque bars. The next package will be the lock bar assembly. That includes 2 keyhole bars and 2 stud assemblies. Next will be the stainless steel shell halves. Here's the front shell, and then in the box we still have the back half of the splice case. 4 different sizes of splice cases are available. We manufacture a 4-inch in diameter splice case, a 6.5-inch in diameter splice case, a 9.5-inch in diameter, and a 12.5-inch in diameter. On the 6.5, we have 2 different lengths of closures available, 28 inches long and 38 inches long. On the 9.5, we have the 28, 38, and then the super stretch, the 45. And the 12.5 is the same sizes as the 9.5, that is 28, 38, and 45. We also have various end plate options available. I'm going to grab the measure tape and go down and measure the cable, and we'll start the installation. Okay, we're down here in the manhole, and I brought with me an end plate, the measure tape, and the cue card. But before we go any further, we need to talk about how to use the measure tape. It's probably the most critical part of the installation. The measure tape is red in color. It is the only acceptable measuring system for the preformed splice case. It goes by the alphabet, A through Z, and on the end we have the double A through double D blade sizes. In between each blade size, we have a dark area with a number 2, a light area with a number 1. This simply means 1 layer of tape on the cable or 2 layers of tape on the cable. On the end here, we have the word index, an arrow pointing at the index line, and we're using the index line to identify the blade size. Measuring an imaginary cable in the air, whatever blade size this index line falls on, that's the blade you would choose. There's an if to every rule. And in this case, if the index line falls on a line, always move to the right. As an example, let's say it falls on a line between the A and the B, always move to the B, or moving to the right. Or let's say it falls on a line between a C and a D, you'd move to the D blade size. Again, always moving to the right. It is an important part of the application. That's why we package a cue card with every splice case. In case it's been a while since you installed a closure, you open it up and look at the top of the page, we go over the measure tape a little more. On the measure tape, we have the first example. We have an A blade size, but the index line is falling right on the line between the light and the dark area. And like we said earlier, anytime it falls on a line, we move to the right. A would be the blade size. We're moving to the right to the clear area. That's A with 1 layer of tape on the cable. Next one is E. It's falling in the clear area. That's E with 1 layer of tape. Next one is M. That's falling in the dark area. It's easy. M, 2 layers of tape. The final example is falling right on the line between the R and the S. And again, anytime it falls on a line, we move to the right, S being the blade size, dark area being closest, 2 layers of tape on the cable. Okay, when you're measuring the cable, first you need to set it up so you have 6 inches of non-stress straight cable entry entering the splice case. And let me change this around here just a little bit so you can see a little better. I've already set this up before we got started, but again, we need 6 inches of non-stress straight cable entry entering the end plate at this location, and it's also very important for the other side of the splice case. When you measure the cable, make certain that you measure it in the general area where the end plate will be placed, and that's also important to do it for both sides of the splice. Make sure that you've cleaned off any mud or grease, lubricant, or whatever from the cable sheath so that you're actually measuring the cable sheath. Take the measure tape, wrap it around the cable at the location that you'll be installing the end plate. Seat it on the cable like this, pull it down. This would be a P with 1 half-lap layer of tape on the cable. Again, it's always important to measure the other cable So we'll go to this side in the general area of end plate placement. Again, we'll take, seat it on the cable, pull it down, and in this case it's a P1 also. Okay, let's go back to the cue card again. We're using the bottom of the cue card as a worksheet. One thing that's important to know is we've taken the time to identify the bolt heads on the end plate. The reason we've done that, here's the end plate, here's the bolt heads. Also be aware of where the torque bar slots are. One important way of looking at it is the cable's a circle, the end plate is a circle. This end plate can be installed on the cable any way like this. However, it's going to be a little easier to install the end plate if the bolt heads are facing you. So what we're trying to point out on this cue card here is so if you can use this as a worksheet to mark your cable entry locations. So say if you want a large cable on top, a small one on the bottom, that it will fall that way when you're doing the installation. Even if you drill it wrong, the worst thing that's going to happen is the bolt heads will face away from you. You'll still be able to get the end plates together, it's just going to take a little longer that way. Down below we measured the cable with the cable measure tape, and that's in preparation for drilling the end plates. Before we do the actual drilling, we should probably learn a little bit more about the end plates. This is a standard 2-section end plate that we package in the kit. When you drill, you can only drill on this seam area. Also, note that we have a diamond location top and bottom on the seam where my thumbs are located. So when you drill, you must stay within these diamond locations. If you have more than one cable, you must have at least 1/4 of an inch distance in between each cable. We have charts in the application procedures that detail how much cable each end plate can accept. What I usually do is I simply take the blades from the blade kit that the particular job calls for, and I lay them on the seam of the end plate. And this way, visually, I can see if this end plate will accept this much cable. Now we're ready to drill. Before we drill the end plates, let's take a look at the cutter. The cutter is designed to cut all 4 different diameters of splice cases by just moving these stop posts. Place both at this location for the 4, here for the 6.5, and at this location for the 9.5. If we'll be drilling the 12.5 inch splice case, remove both stop posts. We'll be drilling a 9.5, so I'll replace this one. Now one item you should know about is that on the blade sizes A through D, we use a different type of blade. It's a spade bit. So to install that, simply push the blade into the chuck, use the chuck key, turn this clockwise until it's tight. However, for this application, we'll be using the larger blade size, so we need to insert the adapter. Push the adapter in till it stops. Using the chuck key, turn this clockwise until it's tight. Remove the screw. Go to the blade kit, and in this application, we're looking for the P blade size. And always take a second to make sure that it is the blade that you want. We take the time to imprint each blade correctly. Take the blade, slide it into place. Take the screw, insert that. Turning the screw clockwise until it's tight. Using a screwdriver makes it a little easier. Now we're ready to install the end plate in the cutter. Take the end plate. The seam of the end plate should be parallel with the bars. The torque bar slot here, where my finger is located, should point down. The end plate should rest equally on all 4 corners here. So make sure that happens when you install the end plate. And again, make sure the seam is parallel, bottom against the stop post, and then drop it down. Before you lock the end plate into place, take the point of the blade and run along the seam of the end plate. If it's not right on the seam, then rotate the end plate a little bit until it is. Now we'll move the clamp up to lock the end plate into place. We'll set this at the center location for this application. Turn the thumb screw until it's tight. Sometimes we have more cables in place than a standard 2-section end plate can accept. Then you could use the 3-section end plate. This is an optional end plate. It is not included in the kit. We have 2 seams on this end plate versus the 1 seam on the 2-section end plate. It's laid into the power circle cutter in the same manner. Your torque bar slot should go down. We have a decal on the top to indicate the proper locations to drill the end plate. However, the biggest difference on the drilling is that you must rotate the end plate and relocate the bearing block when you drill. Other than that, the application is the same as a 2-section end plate. In order to use the drill, take the drill adapter from the blade kit, attach that to a 1/2-inch socket, place this into the drill, use the chuck key to tighten it up. Now we're ready to drill. Place the drill at the top of the bearing block, hold the cutter down with your 2 feet like this, then cut straight down exerting light pressure. Cut until you see a white ring showing through and then stop. Okay, stop drilling when you see the white ring showing through. Also, another indicator is the white dust on the surface of the end plate. Take a screwdriver, place it into the edge of the white ring, push it in, and flip out the insert. Same thing for the other side. Now continue cutting the rest of the way through the end plate until it stops on this stop collar. Okay, it stopped on the stop collar. Remove the drill. Bring up the shaft by hand. Slide the bearing block over. Loosen the clamp. Remove the end plate. Knock the dust off. And this is what a hole should look like when you drill. After both end plates are drilled, I always take my snips and then mark the inside surface of the end plate. The reason I do this is so that I will not mix up the end plate halves when I disassemble the end plates. Next, I take the emery cloth, and that's included in the kit. I pick the exterior surface of the end plate and scuff along the seam, on the bottom, on the top, and then around each cabled area. The reason we do this is on the final procedure, we're applying UV protection sealing tape, and it sticks a little better to the end plate if this is scuffed up a little. Now I'm going to disassemble the end plate. I've already disassembled the first end plate, and I've just about got this one apart here. Do this by turning counterclockwise. And then always take the time to remove the torque bar bolts. Next, we'll take the threaded half of the end plates and attach them to one torque bar. Remember, the torque bar has a bent side to it. The bent side is always on the splice bundle side. Also, we have a decal on there to remind you of that. We'll take the end plate, lay the torque bar slot in, place the bolt, turning it clockwise. Pick up the other threaded half of the end plate, place it onto the torque bar, insert the bolt, turning it clockwise, and then I'll use this assembly to mark my sheath opening down below. Okay, up above we went ahead and disassembled the end plates and attached one half to each end of the torque bar. We'll use this assembly to mark our sheath opening. As you know, with this size closure, we're looking at a maximum of an 18-inch sheath opening. I'll set this assembly on the cables. I'll try to center it between the manhole racks. I have a grease pencil and I'll mark the cable sheath. Ideally, we're looking at scuffing about 6 to 8 inches of the cable sheath. So let's start 2 to 3 inches on the outside of the end plate and mark the cable. A couple of inches on the inside here. Same thing at this location, a couple inches on the inside, and then 3 to 4 inches on the outside. Then we'll take this end plate assembly, install lock tape up above, and then I'll go ahead and open the cable. Now that I've marked the cable sheath opening with the torque bar assembly, I'm going to apply C-cement to the 4 end plate halves. But before we add the C-cement, take the emery cloth out of the kit and use only the emery cloth, not a rasper file, and lightly scuff the top and bottom of each cable inlet area. We're not trying to remove too much material, just slightly blunt the edges. Just take the can of C-cement like this and paint the entire surface of the end plate with C-cement. It's very important to dry the C-cement. What I recommend is take the backing from the lock tape sealant, remove it, and use this backing to dry the end plate half. Fold it over like this. And doing it this way, you're accomplishing two things. Number one, you're drying the C-cement, and also you're removing any excess C-cement that might be on the end plate half. And the C-cement should be dry to the touch before you apply the lock tape sealant. Once the C-cement is dry, we apply the lock tape sealant. Remove the backing, white side down, black side up without stretching. Start leaving about 1/2 inch of overhang there. That's not a critical dimension. Press into the flat area, down into each cabled area, and then back over. And do this without stretching. Press it into place. Take your snips, trim this within 1/2 inch or so. And then we want to cut out a notch here so the bolts will run through. And try not to cut one too large on the other side. And of course you do this for all 4 end plate halves if we're doing a total installation. And this is what an end plate should look like prior to application. Ears, as I call them, hanging top and bottom. Black side out, white side down, flat area, cabled area, flat area. Just before we install the end plates, on the 2 remaining halves, take the C-cement one last time and paint a strip just to the bottom and at the top of each cabled area on the end plate. And it's important that we dry this also. So again, take the backing from the lock tape and dry the C-cement. Now we'll take everything into the underground and assemble it. As you can see, I've already opened the cable sheath and exposed the pairs. And at this point, I'll go ahead and scuff the cable. Use the included emery cloth in the end plate kit. And basically what we want to do is scuff going around the cable. No matter what product you put on, always make certain that you scuff going around the cable rather than along the cable. It's very important for the application. So it's not very hard to do. Just scuff and make certain that you go all the way around the cable. Okay, occasionally you will have a flat area on the cable. If you do, just take the emery cloth, bend it over, and then work the flat area like this. Again, making certain that you go around the cable. It seems that it's scuffed pretty good. At this point, I'll apply the C-cement. And you don't have to be real fancy with it. We're not trying to paint a house. We're just trying to coat the cable with C-cement. Then I'll take the backing from the lock tape, like we described earlier in the preparation of the end plates, and dry the C-cement. And it's true with all telephone company practices. It's very important for C-cement to be dry to the touch prior to the application of the lock tape. Okay, after we finish drying the C-cement, now we're ready to install the lock tape sealant. Only use the material that we supply in the kit. No other types of sealing tapes will work with our splice case. It must be the lock tape sealant that we supply. At this point, we'll be applying either 1 half-lap layer of tape or 2 half-lap layers of tape as indicated on the measure tape. On this particular application, it only called for 1 half-lap layer of lock tape. So first, remove the backing. And next, we want to make certain that the C-cement is dry. So first lay the lock tape sealant on the cable sheath and give it a little tug. If it pulls off, that's an indicator that the C-cement is still too wet. So remove the lock tape and re-dry the C-cement. As you can see, the C-cement should be dry to the touch. Without stretching the tape, bring it around to where this edge meets this just about in the center. What we're trying to do here is build a guide seam, and here's the guide seam that we've built. Right now the tape is 1.5 inches wide. reduce its width by 1/3 down about an inch, inch and an eighth. It looks a little whitish or grayish compared to the non-stretched. And also, that's about all it wants to go anyway. Now bring it around while it's stretched and take this edge and match the guide seam. And as you go around, each time you're going to automatically have a new guide seam. So it's important to stretch it, reduce its width by 1/3, bring it around, and each time this inside edge should match the guide seam as you go around. And this would be the proper way to put on one half-lap layer of lock tape. Okay, at this point, this is one half-lap layer of lock tape, and that's what the measure tape called for when we measured the cable a little earlier. However, just so that you'll know, I'll show you how to put on two half-lap layers if the measure tape would have called for that. So without cutting the tape, continue on around, and again, this is if the measure tape had called for 2 layers. Start again, reduce its width by 1/3. On the second layer, you will have built a new guide seam. And then work your way back across, stretching the tape, matching the guide seam each time as you go around. But remember, our measure tape for this application only called for 1 layer or 1 half-lap layer of tape, so I'll go ahead and take off this second layer. And now we're ready to prepare the other cable. Okay, now that we have applied the lock tape to the cable sheath, we're ready to install the end plates. But before we install the end plates, we need to shape the cable. Show you why cable shaping is important. I have one of the end plate halves that we'll be installing, then one of our pair protectors. Generally speaking, we need an oval-shaped cable to install the end plate on. Admittedly, the pair protector is an over-exaggerated example, but it shows basically what we're trying to do. So generally speaking, we want an oval-shaped cable, and the end plate needs to be installed upon this cable like this. If the oval is going against the end plate, you tend to catch the cable sheath. So always take time to shape the cable so that we have a general oval shape for the end plate installation. There's an if to every rule, and in this case it's in regard to lead cable. With lead cable, do not overshape lead cable. It tends to cave in under the compression. So we'll use our cable shapers. These are available from the manufacturer. They're very easy to use. Simply adjust them here, lay them on the cable sheath, and then take time to oval shape every cable that we'll be installing into the splice case. And same thing over here. Before we continue on with the installation of the splice case, I'd like to mention an important feature, and that's in regard to the sheath opening dimensions. Our splice case works independent of the bond clips, whereby the end plate, in combination with the lock tape system, holds the cable into place. So this means that you can have any sheath opening up to the maximum sheath opening, and the bond placement is not critical. Next, we'll go to the end plate placement. And we've already assembled the torque bar and the end plates and applied the lock tape above. Also remember earlier we marked the end plate, and that's this half here, with an X so that we would not mix up the halves during the assembly. I've already applied the bolts to make it a little easier as we assemble it. I place the torque bar assembly on the back side. We make sure that everything is lined up properly. And then we'll take the end plate half. Make sure the torque bar slot is facing the splice bundle. We'll take the top bolt and get it started. And then I'll take the ratchet wrench and drive it in a little more. And then we'll go and get the bottom one. We'll go ahead and start the other side. Again, make certain that this torque bar slot faces the sheath bundle. At this point, we're ready to bring the end plates together. It's always important to bring the end plates together evenly. If my hands were the end plate halves, always bring them together like this. Never like this and then down like this, but always an even application. And it's going to make the application much, much easier. Now we'll go over here and start bringing this together. Never use an air gun for this assembly. Also, as you're doing the assembly, rotate from one side to the other. I'll go ahead and attach the ratchet wrench to make it a little easier for me. And turning clockwise, bring it together very slowly. Top, bottom, top, and then usually I'll rotate to the other side to give time for the materials to displace a little bit. Usually before I go very far, I'll take the other torque bar. Remember, as we discussed earlier, the torque bar has a bent side to it. The bent side should be on the splice bundle side. Also, there's a decal to remind you of that. We'll take the torque bar bolts, slide in the old torque bar, go to the other location, and we'll lock the other lock bar into place. And then we'll continue tightening the end plate. Again, it's very important to rotate top and bottom and then end plate to end plate as you're bringing the end plate halves together. Same thing over here. What we want to do is bring the end plate halves together until they meet metal to metal. And then the little ears that we talked about earlier above, these ears should lay over. And when the ears have laid over, then this is a good indicator that the end plate is tight. Again, we keep going through the sequence of top to bottom, side to side. And again, it provides time for the materials to move around a little bit. Using the ratchet wrench, bring it together, turning clockwise, rotating top and bottom so that you're bringing the end plate halves together evenly. At this point, it's getting very close. The ears are starting to lay over. Also, the halves are just about to meet. When the halves meet metal to metal and the ears are laying over and it's getting very hard to turn the ratchet wrench, that's a good indicator that the end plate is tight. We no longer need the ears, so without pulling or tearing, we'll use our snips, lift up on the ears, lay the snips on the end plate surface, and trim off. And do this for all the ears, top and bottom, for the total installation. Next, we'll use UV protection sealing tape. As we were talking earlier, and probably as you know, lock tape will deteriorate when exposed to sunlight and air. The UV tape will prevent this from happening. Basically, deterioration is line of sight. If it's covered up underneath this, it will not migrate underneath the end plate. So first, leave the paper backing on, starting against the end plate right here along the seam. And if you recall a little earlier, we scuffed this area. The reason we scuffed it is so this UV tape would stick better. Also, we want to apply the UV tape before we flash test the splice case, because your soap solution is a little oily or greasy and the UV tape will not stick well. So again, start here on the bottom on the seam, leaving the paper backing on, work the way up, take your snips, trim this off at the top, feather it into place while the paper backing is still on, then remove the paper backing, and then again feather it, making certain that the UV tape adheres to the end plate well. Do the bottom seam in the same manner. Again, leaving the paper backing on. Take time to feather it into place. And again, take time to feather it. And then what we want to do is go around the end plate, grabbing the cable and the end plate in case the cables flex a little bit. Trim this off, remove the paper backing, then take time to press this into place so that it grips the end plate and the cable. Finally, we'll take vinyl tape and we'll apply vinyl tape on the exposed lock tape that we applied to the cable sheath. Start against the end plate, grabbing the UV tape, and then apply 2 half-lapped layers of vinyl tape on the exposed lock tape that we applied to the cable sheath. As is true with all applications, instead of pulling or tearing, take your snips and cut this, let it relax into place, then press it in, and this would be a completed end plate installation up to this point. Let's do a quick recap on everything we've done up to this point. First, we straighten the cable. Then we measure the cable with the cable measure tape. Then we drilled a hole in the end plate. We applied lock tape sealant to the end plate halves, to the cable sheath. We shaped the cable. We bolted the end plate halves together. We applied UV protection sealing tape to the seam. We applied vinyl tape on the outside on the cable. We're now ready to install the stainless steel shells using a lock bar fastening system. But before we do, I thought I'd mention a few important features about the system. This is the back lock bar. It is made of stainless steel. And this gray flag here should always point away from the closure when you install it. Everything's pre-staked at the factory. The studs are flared over so the nuts will not run off easily. Also, it's pre-lubricated. We have a front bar called the keyhole bar. And again, we have this gray flag that points away from the closure on assembly. To install it, run this through the back side of the closure, install the front keyhole bar, slide it over, and then torque it down according to the sequence on the decal. Talk about the shells here for a minute. This is the front stainless steel half. Is made of a 3/16 stainless steel. The front half is identified by the torquing sequence decal and the air valve flange. Looking at the inside here, the entire length of the closure is lined with neoprene. The primary purpose of the neoprene is to seal the splice case. You never need a re-entry kit to get back into this type of splice closure. The neoprene liner also acts as an insulator to prevent condensation inside the closure. Also on the front half of the closure, we have an external bond strap so you can bond the stainless steel shell to the cable shield. Also note that at the factory we have applied paper liners. The paper liners are there to protect the lubrication that is applied at the factory. Always make certain that you remove the paper liners before you apply the shells. Also, before you apply the shells, especially if it's 32 degrees and below, you must warm the shells prior to application so the neoprene will be warm and pliable. We could do as we've done here. We can lay them into the manhole so they'll be warm, leave them in the cab of a truck, or have them in the tent. But anyway, so that if it's 32 degrees and below, the shells will be warm. When you install the shells, make certain that the end plates lay in the lips that are located on each end of the shell. This is an underground installation, so we'll have to install an external bond clip. So take the front keyhole bar, take one of the studs that's in the kit, run the stud through the hole. You also have an alternate location at the end of the keyhole bar here. Take the external bond clip, lay it onto the stud, take the nut that's included in the kit, place it on the stud, turning it clockwise until it's hand tight, and now we're ready to install the lock bar. Okay, I've made certain that I've removed the paper liners. I'll install the front half first so I can install the external bond strap. I'll set this into place, use the can wrench, and make certain that it's tightened down. Then we'll install the back half of the stainless steel shell. Again, making sure that the paper liners are removed. Also make sure that the end plates are within the lips of the shell, as we talked about a little earlier. Take the back lock bar assembly with the gray flag pointing away, slide it through the back side. This is the keyhole bar. Set this into place. Gray flag pointing away, slide it over. Always do the top one, and that way it helps hold it up for you a little bit. Then we'll do the bottom. Again, take the back lock bar assembly, gray flag pointing away from the closure, slide it into place. We'll take the keyhole bar, gray flag pointing away, place it on there, slide it over, and then torque it down according to the sequence on the decal. But make sure you're using an inch-pound torque wrench. Here are the sequence and torquing procedures to follow when securing the lock bar assembly. All the nuts have been grouped into sets. Using a ratchet wrench, start with set 1 at the X location and follow the arrow. Do set 1, set 2, set 3, set 4, set 5, set 6. And at this point, we're just trying to bring the flanges together. Now use an inch-pound torque wrench, set it at 125 inch-pounds. Start with set 1 again at the X location, following the direction of the arrow. Set 1, set 2, set 3, set 4, set 5, set 6. Final sequence, and an important step of the sequence, is to retorque the 2 outer corner bolts. So while the torque wrench is still set at 125 inch-pounds, start with set 3, set 4, set 5, set 6. And this is completed torquing sequence on the splice case. It is normal and it is built into the system for a certain amount of relaxation to occur. This is normal. Do not retorque the splice case. Torquing down a stretch splice case is a little different, but I think is easier. Looking at the decal, we start at the center with set 1, and that's actually the shorter lock bar assembly. So So we start at set 1 and work our way out at 125 inch-pounds. We drop down to the bottom of the closure for set 2, that's the longer lock bar assembly. We start at the center and work our way out to the end. While we're on the bottom, we move over to the shorter lock bar assembly, that's set 3, starting at the center and work our way out. We move up to set 4, that's at the top, that's the longer lock bar assembly, starting at the center and work our way out. After you've completed the sequence at 125 inch-pounds, the final sequence is go back to the 2 corner bolts at all 4 locations and retorque at 125 inch-pounds. One other item to be concerned with is in regard to the 4-inch case. We install the lock bars and torque it down just like we did on the standard length closure that we first discussed. However, instead of 125 inch-pounds, is only 85 inch-pounds. And that's all there is to it. After you've completed torquing down the splice case, you should flash test it. Take an air valve, install it in the air valve flange, tighten it down, put your air on the air valve, and then flash test the closure according to your aseptic company practice. Always soap around the end plates, along the flange area of each closure, and also make certain that you flash test around the air valve flange because there is an O-ring around there. After you have completed the flash testing procedure, remove the air. We prefer that you remove the air valve. However, if you must leave the air valve in, make certain that it is a brand new air valve. So remove the air valve. Take the stainless steel plug that we package with the splice case, install it in the air valve flange, turning clockwise, make sure it's tight. Now the final step is to tie down the splice case. Just use tie wraps and take the tie wrap and wrap it around the manhole step so that we're tying down the cable. It's important to do this on both sides of the splice case. And then cut off the ends. And this completes the application of the splice case. Now that I've completed the installation, and then before I tear down everything, why don't we recap everything we've done today? First, I measured the cable with the cable measure tape. And with the cable measurement, I selected the blade size and drilled a hole into the end plate. Then I took the lock tape sealant, applied it to the end plate halves, and I applied the lock tape sealant to the cable sheath. I shaped the cable with the cable shapers. We bolted the end plates together. We applied UV protection sealing tape, vinyl tape. Then we installed the shells. We installed the lock bar assembly, torqued it down according to the sequence on the decal, and then we flash tested the closure. And really, that's all we've done. It is a pretty easy installation. When measuring lead cable, do the following. Before we measure lead cable, we must first prepare it. First, scuff it with the emery cloth at the location that we'll be installing the end plate. We need to scuff about 6 to 8 inches of the cable sheet. And again, as with any application, always scuff going around the cable. Next, take sea cement and coat the scuffed area with sea cement. Now dry the sea cement with the backing from the lock tape. Remember, sea cement must be dry to the touch before we apply lock tape sealant. Next, we'll apply 1 half-lap layer of lock tape over the scuffed area. Start without stretching the tape, going around, meeting this approximately in the center, building our guide seam. Now reduce its width by 1/3 down to about an inch, inch and an eighth. Also, that's about all it wants to stretch. Bring it around to to where this edge meets the guide seam, and we will apply 1 half-lap layer of lock tape on the lead cable sheath. Finally, use the cable measure tape, measuring over the lock tape application. In this case, it's an H1. Now do whatever the measure tape says. We would drill an H hole and apply 1 half-lap layer of lock tape on top of the lock tape sealant. Let's talk about aerial applications. In every splice case, we package an aerial application kit. This includes 2 suspension plates, 2 stud assemblies, and then 2 nuts. Before you install the lock bar, take the back lock bar section on the gray flag side, pointing away from the splice case. Also note that we have 2 holes, 1 on each end of the lock bar. Take the suspension plate, place it on the gray flag side, run a stud through. Now install the nut and tighten it down. Do this on the other side. Now install the lock bar and close the splice case as we have discussed earlier in the video. Now make sure that the flange is running parallel with the strand. Take 2 lashing wire clamps. Place 1 on each end of the closure, install it on the strand, run the stud through the suspension plate hole, and tighten down. This will do 2 things: support the splice case to the strand and bond it. And now strap the cables down according to your practices. Let's talk about the manhole support assembly. Often it's necessary to support the splice case, possibly due to manhole racking alignments. Our kit includes 2 gray holders and 4 T-hangers. 2 of the T-hangers include a nut and bolt. It's a 2-step assembly. First, we need the lock bar, the front section of the lock bar, the keyhole, and we'll install this on the top of the splice case. Note that we have a hole at each location. And we'll take the T-hanger with the nut and bolt. And to install this T-hanger, take the stud, send it through the back of the lock bar. T-hanger should be placed on the front. Then take the nut, place this finger tight. The T-hanger should be on the same side as the gray flag. We also need to install the other T-hanger at the other hole on the keyhole bar. Again, it's a 2-stage assembly. We'll be installing the 2 remaining T-hangers when we finish the application of the splice case. Something that we should note: if you're installing the external bond clip, you must install this on the bottom keyhole bar for the lock bar. At this point, I'll install the stainless steel closures using the sequence listed on the decal, and then I'll pick up the installation from there. Now we'll install the 2 black T-hangers and the 2 gray supports. I've already installed the one on this side. And to install the T-hanger, pick the last bolt at the top of the splice case, slide it into place. Now we'll take the gray holder, slide it over this T-hanger, the other T-hanger, down to about the 4th bolt. Then we'll take a ratchet wrench and tighten this nut. Now we'll lift up the splice case, relocate the step, and this supports the splice case properly. As you can see, this is a good way to support the stainless steel closure. This kit is available for all sizes of the stainless steel closure, with the exception of the 4-inch. And this pretty much wraps up the application. Now we're going to talk about one of the best features on the splice case, and that's the easy reenterability. Before you reenter the splice case, you should always release the air pressure Do this by removing the air valve plug. Next, I've already removed the external bond strap, and this will make it a lot easier to remove the top lock bar. Earlier we talked about the torquing sequence decal. Refer back to this decal, and we're going to use a reverse sequence to re-enter the splice case. Looking at the decal, start at set 6, we have 2 nut locations down there. Then move to set 5, 2 nut locations there. Set 4, set 3. On set 2 we have 3 nuts at this location, and the final set will be set 1 with 3 nuts there. Back off the nuts as far as they will go, then we remove the front lock bar assembly. Start at the bottom, and this way the splice case shell is still supported. Remove the front keyhole bar, then remove the back stud lock bar assembly. Should remember that most likely on the inside we have bonded the splice case shell to the cable shield. So you should have a can wrench ready so you can disconnect that. Remove the front keyhole bar. Remove the back lock bar. And it's best to hold the shell together. Move things back a little bit so that you can get in and remove this bonding strap. That's released. Now pull off the front shell, then slide off the back shell. As you can see, it's very easy to get back into. Now something you should know about is the lubrication. Earlier we talked about lubricating the shells at the factory. In the field, in time, the lubrication will be absorbed by the neoprene, and you will have to re-lubricate occasionally. Only use the lubrication that we supply. Other lubricants, such as WD-40, engine oil, or hand cleaner, for instance, will probably hurt the lock tape sealing system. So again, it's very important to only use the lubrication that is available from the manufacturer. A thin layer is all that's necessary on the end plate halves or on the shells. And really, that's the only maintenance that's required to re-enter the splice case, and simply replace the shells, reinstall the lock bar system, and then follow the torquing sequence. And that's all there is to it. It's one of the easiest closures to re-enter today. I'm removing this end plate because we need to add a cable here today. In order to do that, though, we first must remove the stainless steel shells, then remove all the bolts on the torque bars, remove the torque bars, and also remove the bolts on the end plate that we're going to remove. I'll be using the end plate removal tool to separate the end plate and remove it from the cable. Makes the job a lot easier, especially when an end plate's been installed for a good while. To use the end plate removal tool, it can be used on the outside or inside for the wedge placement, or on the bottom, whatever's easier for your particular installation. I think I'll start from the inside here. I'll place the wedge on the outside right on the seam of the end plate, then turning the shaft here clockwise until it locks into position. Then we'll take the ratcheter and then turn clockwise and drive the wedge through the end plate seam. Now if the end plate's been there for a while, you may need your snips or your knife to trim the lock tape as you separate the end plate halves. Continue driving the wedge through the end plate. At this point, remove the ratchet wrench. Then you can use the end of the end plate removal tool as a lever. And you may have to use your snips to get to the inside seam of the end plate so we can split the lock tape. If it will not come off immediately, take the end plate removal tool, roll it 90 degrees, Then lock it onto the outer edge of the end plate. And we're not worried about damaging the end plate here because we never reuse end plates, because most of the time we'll tear them up removing them. Then use this as a lever to pull it off. Since we can't reuse the end plate anyway, we just throw it away. Then we need to remove the remaining half, and that's step 2 of the removal operation. We'll roll the end plate if possible. If not, try to lay the end plate removal tool in the back area. Lock it into place like this again. Use the ratchet wrench to lock it in. Make sure it's tight. And we also have 2 accessory handles. These are included in the end plate removal kit. And we're using these just as an additional lever to remove the end plate on some of the harder installations. On some installations, again, it may be necessary to cut the lock tape to make the end plate removal a little easier. Now I'll take this and grip the handles, twisting back and forth. I'll use my snips. And then remove the end plate. For all end plate installations, always use a brand new end plate. You can never reuse an end plate. Always remove all of the lock tape to the cable sheath. No sealant should be left on the cable sheath. Start with clean sealant, scuff the cable, measure the cable, and then install the end plate as we discussed earlier in the video. And that would complete the end plate removal section. This is an option for the PLP splice case that I'd like to show you. It's a splice case coupling. It's designed so that you can mate 2 9.5-inch splice cases together. We talked earlier, and as we said, that we had a 45-inch long splice case. But as you probably know, often you need something longer than that, and that's when the splice case coupling really shines. When you receive it from the factory, it's already pre-assembled. So before you assemble the closure, or the coupling, you need to back off the bolts. Then opening it up so you can see the inside, we're still using lock tape sealant to seal the coupling, but for the splice case coupling, we pre-cut the lock tape at the factory. This way it will make the application easier for you in the field. We have release paper. We must remove the release paper before we install it. Take the threaded section of the coupling and then lay it around the splice bundle. Be a little easier on a smaller section of the splice bundle. Take the front half of the coupling, set this into place. Usually I roll it over a little bit and hold it with my hand to help support it, and then start the bolts. And with this one we've got 4 bolts to install. Then we'll take our ratchet wrench and get it started. Never use an air gun for this part of the assembly. Always just a ratchet wrench. Now that we've captured the bolts, I'll use the ratcheter. And then turning clockwise, rotate top and bottom after every 2 or 3 turns. And the whole key to this, again, is rotating from bolt to bolt so that we bring the coupling together evenly. Bring the coupler together until it meets metal to metal, top and also at the bottom. Now we're ready to install the torque bars. Now remember, we're splicing 2 splice cases together here with the coupler. Therefore, we need to install 4 torque bars. Often, you have to install an end plate half to one of the torque bars, like we did on a splice case application earlier. To install a torque bar, you install it in the same manner as you would an end plate half. Then install the other 3 torque bars at this location, and this location. If you're installing an end plate, install the end plate as we discussed earlier in the practice. When we're installing the coupler, we need 2 splice cases. I've already installed the first splice case. Something that is important would be the lips of the splice case. We talked about this earlier. Each splice case shell has a lip on each end. This lip should seat over the end of this end plate. The lip on this end of the shell should lay within the groove on the coupler. Also, when you install a shell, make certain that we have offset the flange areas so that we can install the lock bar assembly. Install the back lock bar with the gray flag pointing away from the closure. The keyhole bar, again the flag pointing away, and finally the bottom section. Now torque down the splice case according to the decal. To complete the installation of the coupler, place a small section of UV tape at the seam, and we have 2 seams on the coupler to protect the lock tape. Now we're ready to flash test the closure. Flash test according to aseptic company practices. A couple other items on the splice case coupling is that never join more than 2 splice cases using the coupling. It's designed to hold 15 pounds of air for outside plant applications. It can also be used for vault closure applications. And as you can see, it's really very easy to install, and it really adds to the versatility of the closure. Another nice option on the splice case series is the T-carrier end plate. These ports are installed at the factory, and they'll vary in diameter depending on your job requirements: 3/4 of an inch, 1 inch, 1 1/4, 1 1/2 inches. And also the number of ports that we install at the factory in the end plate will vary depending on the size of the ports. Another nice feature of this end plate is that you can still drill the center section for the main cable installation in the field. You have on the outside of the end plate, we have a hose clamp. This hose clamp would be removed. On the inside, we have a retainer clamp. Remove that one, and then pull out the plastic plug. Then cut the neoprene end, and then we prepare the carrier cable and push it through, and then tighten down the clamps. And that's really all there is to the installation. Before we install the carrier cables, it's always easier to install the end plates on the main cable first. To start the installation, first loosen the outside sealing clamp by turning counterclockwise. On the inside white sealing clamp, just flip it loose, then pull out and then throw away this internal plug. Take your snips and cut away the top of this port on the inside of the end plate. This is so the carrier cable will run through. Now let's mark the carrier cable. Lay the carrier cable up against the end plate and first place a mark just about in the center of the end plate. Now go to the outside carrier cable port and go about another inch or so and place a mark at this location. Let's make this one a little more clear. This should be just about 4 inches. Now go to the center, in other words divide it in half so we have 2 inches on each side. Here's the inside surface of the end plate. We need to go 1 1/2 inches beyond that so you can place a bond clip. Then mark this for your cable sheath opening. Now we're ready to insert the carrier cable into the end plate. So first push back the carrier cable, start it, and then push it into the carrier cable port. By doing this, it's going to make the application a little easier when we start scuffing the cable. So we get to this point right here. We have the cable markings for the 4-inch area. Let's pull it in a little closer. Now we'll take the emery cloth And then take the emery cloth and again scuff going around the cable as we discussed earlier in the video. After we've completely scuffed the cable, now we're ready to apply the sea cement. And just a thin layer of sea cement is all that's necessary. Then take the backing off the lock tape, the same way we've done in other applications, and dry this sea cement. As we said earlier, just remove any excess sea cement and make sure that it dries a little quicker. Should be dry to the touch. Now that it's dry, we'll remark the cable so we'll know the proper location to start the lock tape application. Remember, this was the 4-inch area. There's a white mark right there. I can just see this one right here. Remember, we divide that in half to start right in the center. Next, we'll take our lock tape. Here's the lock tape. What we need to do is cut this at an angle. Remove the backing. Starting right at the center location without pulling, go around until you capture the end of the lock tape. We want to reduce this width by 1/3, and all we're trying to do is build up the lock tape until it just will fit inside the carrier port inlet. So usually just 1 or 2 layers will do it. And if you want to make certain, you can pull the carrier cable in to see that it will fit properly. In this case, it will. We'll push it back out. What we need to do is feather this over to complete the lock tape application. Next, we'll take the sealant that's included in the kit. We'll place this on the cable sheath and butt it up against the lock tape buildup. Just 1 or 2 layers is fine. Feather it out. Now pull the carrier cable in to the port until it bottoms out. As far as that one will go. Then take your wrench and then turning the sealing clamp clockwise until it's tight. Next, take your pliers and just squeeze together this white sealing clamp on the inside. Now take vinyl tape and apply 2 half-lap layers of vinyl tape on the exposed lock tape on the outside. Make sure that it overlaps over the end of the port. Always cut the last layer, never pull or tear it, let it relax, and then press it into place. Then take your wrench and make sure that the remaining ports are tight. Now you're ready to install the stainless steel shells in the same manner that we did earlier, and this would complete the carrier end plate installation. The PLP splice case offers many optional end plates. Today we'll talk about the end plate with the air valve port. This end plate is installed in the same manner as a standard 2-section end plate. After it's installed, you can use it for 3 different applications. The first being you could use it to flash test the splice case. Second, we can use it for external ground or sheath isolation. And third, it can be used for transducer installations. To flash test with this end plate, take the air valve, place it in the air valve port. And we'll do sort of a quick overview on this. You would tighten it down with your ratchet wrench. Then take an air hose. Then flash test it according to your company practice. After you've completed the flash testing operation, remove the air hose, remove the air valve, and then install the included metal plug. Turn that clockwise make sure that the final installation is tight. Something that's important to note for this application is always make certain that the stainless steel plug is included on the stainless steel air valve flange located on the stainless steel shell. Another option with this end plate is the cable shield isolation. We have an external ground kit available, and this is separate from the end plate kit. It includes an outside assembly, an inside assembly, and the bond strap. To install it, first you would remove the stainless steel plug. Take the outside assembly, install it, turning clockwise. Make sure that it's tight. Now also be aware, we still have a hole location here. This can be used with an air valve or with the preferred method, the stainless steel plug. Turn this clockwise, and as always, make certain that it is tight. Again, make sure that the air valve flange on the splice case has a plug in it. Now at this point on the external ground clip, we can run a bonding strip or ribbon into there, turn this bolt clockwise and seal it. Now we'll go to the inside of the closure and connect it to the cable sheath. Remove the shells using the directions on the splice case decal. Next, install the large fitting into the air valve port. Make sure that it's tight. Then we'll need the strap and then the stud assembly. Send the stud through the strap. Place this in the assembly that we just placed in the air valve port, and then just make this finger tight initially. Bring this around and lay the strap onto the bond connector stud. Install the nut. Take your wrench and then make sure that you have a tight fitting. Then to complete the installation, tighten the fitting at the air valve port, and this would complete the application for the external ground kit. The third use for this air valve port end plate is transducer installations. And for transducer installations, refer to the manufacturer specifications. Now we're ready to install a stainless steel shell, and simply reinstall it and follow the torquing sequence on the decal. I'm ready. Let's talk about one of the most popular versions of the PLP splice case, and that's the Vault Closure series. The Vault Closure series is fire retardant and is also designed to keep air in and water out. It will hold 5 pounds of air. There's two different versions. There's a new construction version and also Vault Rehab. In regard to new construction, we offer a 36-entry vault end plate. It's designed to accept a tip cable ranging in size from 0.88 to 1.08 inches in diameter. In regard to the Vault Closure Rehab kit, it's actually packaged with 3 different part numbers. First one would be the 2-section end plate for the feeder cable installations. Second would be the multi-section end plate for the tip cable entries. Finally, the third part number would be the shell kits, using the same shell kits as we do for the outside plant. Therefore, the lengths will be the same, 28, 38, and 45 inches long. We also can use the splice case coupling for this installation. In addition, we have vault closure versions for the 6.5-inch splice case and the 4-inch splice case. Why don't we look at the installation of a 36-entry end plate now? Before we install the 36-entry end plate, it's always best to install a 2-section end plate first and the torque bars. This helps make the application easier and it stabilizes a 36-entry end plate. It's always best to start at the center location and then use the lubrication that we include in the kit and just squirt a little bit of lubricant into the hole that we'll be inserting the tip cable. Next, I usually mark the tip cable. Just take a marking pen. I usually mark where the end plate is. Then we need to go about another 1/2 inch for the bond clip placement. Now we'll slide the tip cable back so we can push it into the tip cable end plate. then by pushing and pulling, we'll pull the tip cable through. Always pull through more tip cable than we have marked, and this way it makes it a little easier to open the cable. After removing the cable sheath, push the tip cable back into the end plate so that no less than 1.5 inches of cable sheath extends beyond the end plate surface. Now bond the tip cables according to your accepted company practices. For any tip cable holes that are not used, order plugs separately, lubricate it, we'll use this one as an example, and then push the plug into the unused hole. It usually helps to rock the plug into place, push it all the way through until it bottoms out. After all the tips and the plugs have been installed in the 36 entry end plate, you're ready to install the shells. That's pretty easy. You install the shells in the same manner that we discussed earlier in the video. One important difference with this vault closure versus a standard splice case is the maximum air pressure is 5 pounds of air versus the outside plant version is 15 pounds. And that pretty much wraps up the installation. Let's look at the multi-section end plate application. But before we start that, we need to install the 2-section end plate for the feeder cable side. I've already installed this one here. This end plate is installed in the same manner as we discussed earlier in the video. The only difference is the application of a UV protection sealing tape. On the fire retardant end plate, that's not necessary. The reason that is because at the factory, fire retardant tape is applied to the end plate surface. Therefore, scuffing isn't necessary or the application of UV protection sealant. Instead of, in the kit, we have included fire retardant tape that's applied to the seam and around each cable and entry. Next, let's look at the multi-section end plate. And as we talked a little earlier too, the multi-section end plate is available in a 3-section, 4-section, or 6-section end plate. On this installation, we'll be using the 4-section end plate. The exterior surface is coated with the fire retardant tape. On the inside, we mark the sections, and depending on how many sections you have, it's a double A, double B, double C, double D, etc. The tip cables will be marked should you have different sizes of tip cables. If they're all the same, there will be no markings. But should you have 10 of one size, 2 of another, then those 2 would be marked to identify them. Now let's start the installation. Anytime you're installing a vault closure, it's always best to install the 2-section or the feeder end plate so the torque bars lay top and bottom instead of side to side. This way it makes the application of the multi-section end plate much easier. I've already installed the bottom torque bar and the threaded section of the multi-section end plate. We have 2 cable entries. Before we apply the silicone, it's always best to try a test fit of the tip cables. These seem to lay in here pretty good, so move them out of the way. I'll take the caulking gun, it's just a standard caulking gun, and then take the silicone tube that's in the end plate kit and lay 2 beads of silicone along the edge of the end plate, just like this. It's not necessary to scuff the tip cables, but you need to make sure that they are clean. Take the tip cables, just lay it into place. Occasionally you will have to shape the tip cable so that it will lay into the end plate properly, but they are fairly soft and usually you can shape them with your hands. Take the next section. Before you install it, make certain that the letters agree. Take this section of the end plate, and again, we'll lay these 2 beads of silicone on the end plate just like this. Take this, lay it into place, and again make sure these letters agree. We have 3 cable entries here, so let's try a test fit and make sure that these tip cables will lay properly. They do. So now we're ready to apply silicone to this end plate section also. Same manner, just 2 beads of silicone. And just lay these into place. You may have to rotate the tip cables so they'll lay in properly. We'll take the next section. Again, make certain that the letters agree. Flip it over. Then lay a bead of silicone on each edge of the end plate, just like this. Then set this section in place, and again making certain the letters agree. On our final two tip cable entries, it's always best to try the fit. Make certain everything will lay into place properly. These do. Now we can lay the silicone beads into place. And we'll lay these tips into their proper position. And then we'll take the final section of the multi-section end plate and again apply the silicone to the flat area just like this. Silicone will probably give you about a half of an hour to do the installation, so it's not a matter of beat the clock to do the installation. Take this, again make certain the letters agree, set it into place. Now we're ready to bolt it down. In every multi-section end plate kit, we include 2 black bolts. These are used in case the end plate sections are too far apart to bring them together properly. As soon as the metal sections meet metal to metal, then you would install your gold bolts. This installation, we can use the gold bolts. So go ahead and set them into place. Then use your ratchet wrench and bring it together. As in any PLP end plate installation, always bring the end plates together evenly. Also, it's important on the tip cable installations is to look and make certain that you're not pinching or catching the tip cable sheath. If that is happening, just take and rotate the tips a little bit, and that should solve the problem. Bring it together a little ways, and then I usually install the torque bar. As we discussed earlier, the bent side of the torque bar should always be on the splice bundle side. We'll set this one into place. We'll take the torque bar bolt, get this one started over here. Push the end plate out. And this way, by installing the torque bar at this point, it's going to make the application a lot easier. Now we'll continue bringing the end plate sections together until they meet metal to metal. And again, rotate top or bottom or side to side, depending on how the installation is, to make certain that we bring it together in an even application. And again, always stop and make sure the tip cables are laying in the end plate properly. As you bring the end plates together, or the end plate sections, the silicone will start oozing out. This is normal. Do not try to remove any of the silicone at this point. And this one's just about all the way together. Okay, there it is, metal to metal. I can see it. Also, the torque wrench is bottomed out. As you can see, the silicone is oozed out on the sections of the end plate. Take a paper towel and only on this surface of the end plate, remove the silicone. And do this before the silicone has had time to gel. And of course, we'll do the same thing on this side. Do not try to remove the silicone on the seams of the end plate at this point. We need to wait 24 hours before the silicone is set up. And then, if necessary, you can go back and flake off the silicone that is extruding from the seams of the end plates. Now we're ready to install the shells, but before you do, be sure that you bond the cables according to your company practices. Install the shells in the same manner that we discussed earlier in the video. Key difference with the vault closure assembly versus the standard splice case is in regard to the air pressure. This splice case is designed for 5 pounds of air, but that's only after 24 hours. It will only hold 3 pounds of air initially on the flash test. So again, it's very important. 3 pounds initially, 24 hours, 5 pounds of air. Another difference on the closure is in regard to feeder cable entries with a multi-section end plate. Should you have a feeder cable entry with a multi-section end plate that would also include the tips, then most likely this end plate will be pre-drilled. Take the included measure tape in the kit, measure the cable. And at this point, we're just looking for 1 layer of tape or 2 half-lap layers of tape from the cable measurement reading. Then take the lock tape, and just like we discussed earlier, scuff the cable, apply C-cement, dry the C-cement, and then apply either 1 or 2 half-lap layers of tape per the cable measurement. Then treat the feeder cable as though it was a tip cable and apply it or install it in the multi-section end plate. And that pretty much wraps up the application. Let's talk about removing end plates. Anytime you remove an end plate, you can never reuse that end plate. You must always use a brand new end plate. Also, you must remove all sealant from the cable sheath, clean it completely down to the cable sheath, and start over. Sometimes when you re-enter the splice case, and this is true with all mechanical closures, no matter who makes them, you'll see a minor depressed area on the cable sheath. This area must be repaired or go to a stretch splice case. We offer 4 methods of getting around this depressed area. Like we said earlier, you could go to a stretch splice case or even an extension collar so that you can get to new cable sheath, and then you would install the splice case as we discussed earlier. Another method, an extreme method, especially if the cable sheath is very mushy, you may need to install a lead auxiliary. If you install a lead auxiliary, make certain that the lead auxiliary hugs the cable sheath. Also, if you solder the lead auxiliary in place, you must rasp the seam down. Once the lead auxiliary is in place, then treat the lead auxiliary as though it was a lead cable application and install the end plate as we discussed earlier in the video. Another method would be using the green sealant method with our cable repair kit. First, remove all the sealant from the cable sheath, especially out of the depressed area, and then scuff it with the emery cloth. Make sure that it's very clean. And this cable here is pretty clean at this point. Then take a section of green sealant. And what we're trying to do is fill this low area in with the green sealing tape. And you can take time to use your fingers to feather it in so that it grips the cable well. See, it's still a little low here. We'll lay another piece over this. Make sure that it is feathered out on the sheath. We're trying to make the sheath round in a sense. Same thing here. And it's very important that we feather it down. Next, take C-cement and then coat this cleaned area with C-cement. Take backing off the lock tape, as we've done in other applications, and dry the C-cement. It's very important that the C-cement is dry to the touch before we apply the lock tape. Now take your lock tape sealant and apply 1 half-lap layer of lock tape over this repair. Start at the outside area here, just like we've done on the other applications. Bring it around till it meets this at the center location. Reduce its width by 1/3, and then put on 1 half-lap layer of lock tape across the repaired area. Now take the cable measure tape that's included with the lock tape roll. In a sense, we built a new cable sheath with the lock tape. Now take the cable measure tape, wrap it around the lock tape buildup, measure it. In this case, it measures an O with 1/2 lap layer of lock tape. So I would drill an O hole size in the end plate, then I would place 1/2 lap layer of lock tape on top of this. If it would have called for 2, I would have placed 2 half lap layers of lock tape, and then continue with a normal end plate installation as we discussed earlier. Now let's talk about the lock tape buildup method. For the final reapplication method, as in all other applications, always remove all the sealing tape down to the cable sheath, then scuff it with the emery cloth. And as you can see, we're still working with a depressed area on the cable sheath. Take sea cement and apply this to the depressed area. And then dry the sea cement. Then next we'll take the lock tape and we'll cut it into strips and build up the low area. So generally look at it this way. It's a little more time consuming than some of the other methods, but it does work. First start off with a narrow section of lock tape. Lay this into the low area. Trim this off. Next piece will be slightly wider. What you're trying to do is overlap the section that's underneath. Next one again is a little wider. It's a slow build-up method. Take time to feather it out. We'll make this one wider yet. And then one more piece should do it. Again, remove the backing, and always the black side up, white side down. And this would be the final overlap. Make sure this grips the cable well. Now take the sea cement and coat the entire area with sea cement. Occasionally this will lift up a little, but we can press it back into place when it dries. Take the time to dry the sea cement with the backing from the lock tape. This way you can press it into place if it does lift up on you. Then take the lock tape in roll form and apply 1/2 lap layer of lock tape over the repair. Now take the cable measure tape, measure over the lock tape repair as though it was the cable sheath. In this case, it's an O with 1/2 lap layer of lock tape on the cable. So I would drill an O hole size in the end plate and then place 1/2 lap layer of lock tape on the lock tape buildup. In other words, always do what the measure tape says, and then continue with a normal application. Now let's recap. Remember, we talked about 4 different methods. The first was a stretch splice case or extension collar. Second would be the lead auxiliary. Third would be the green sealant buildup. And finally, the lock tape buildup.